Bonjour tout le monde. Welcome. Josette, I just want to confirm you can hear me okay? Perfect. Merci beaucoup. Okay, bonjour tout le monde. We're very happy you've joined us tonight. Josette and I will be leading you through Module 3 of the Daring to Unmute series, and we'd like to begin by providing our land acknowledgement. So I am joining you tonight from the city of Peterborough, which sits on the traditional lands of the Mississauga Anishinaabe people, and we are linked to Treaty 20 and the Williams Treaty.
And I'm joining you from the end of a beautiful day on the unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe land in what's now the Ottawa area, linked to Treaty 27 and later 27 and a quarter. So as we come together with that acknowledgement, we just invite you to think about how the land and the territory that you're on and how our stewardship of the space that we inhabit might maybe link to some of the ideas that we're going to be talking about as we move through the evening tonight, that idea of respect and recognition. And so we're delighted that you're joining us for Module 3. Thank you, especially if you've been here for Module 1 and 2, and if you haven't, we'll give you a little information later on how to catch up on those. But this is our third and final module in this round of the Dare to Unmute module series. And tonight what we're looking at really is some ideas for developing dynamic action-oriented tasks that meet the needs of all the learners in your classroom. And so what Adam and I have done is we really tried to do some reflecting around how we could provide you with some strategies, some tools, and a bit of a framework to look at and to reflect on how you can use different tools and resources to differentiate what you're offering to students in your classroom, to add some choice as well as variation in tasks being delivered, and really to reflect on how you can effectively meet the needs of all the learners in your classroom. And so for our session goals tonight, we're going to invite you to consider a framework for developing action-oriented tasks using the action-oriented approach in your classroom. We're going to provide you with an example of a structure for an action-oriented learning opportunity that provides multiple ways that learners can develop language competency in the different pathways, including looking a little bit at reception, production, interaction, and mediation. We're going to invite you to consider the ways that modeling adaptations to tasks will allow us to really bring learners' strengths to the forefront and offer multiple entry points and pathways through a learning journey. And we're also going to give you some ideas and examples of possible tools and strategies that you might be interested in considering incorporating into learning opportunities that you provide in your own classrooms.
When we think about action-oriented tasks, and it's language we've talked about now for quite a few years, especially around the Ontario curriculum, excuse me, it really centers on the philosophies that come out of the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, or the CEFR. Now, we're not going to dive too far into the CEFR as itself tonight, because we did a lot of work with that, and you heard about that during Module 2, which is available on OMLTA's YouTube channel, and also great information on transforming FSL.ca, the website. So if you feel like you would like to go deeper into that topic, those are your sources for that. Action-oriented tasks, though, really center on that idea of providing students with the chance for active language use in the classroom. That is language that leads to a really authentic purpose. And it does focus on all of those 5 language skills: the spoken production, the interaction, and then the listening, reading, and writing that comes with it. And we know that communication needs to be a purposeful and social activity. And that is what it is. When our students are going to leave us with the skills they've developed in their French language or in any language, and if they have a hope of using that language in their future, we know it needs to be both purposeful and social. So we see our students as those social agents, or acteurs sociaux, as a part of the activities we use in our classroom. So when we are planning action-oriented tasks, we want it to be all of those things that we see on the screen. Actually, Josette, if you go back one slide there, please. Yeah, I think we're actually at the planning action
Yeah,
oriented one.
I've got a bit of a lag in the back and forth, so give it a second.
I'm
It'll be on
sorry.
there.
Okay, that's all good. So no, in the planning action oriented tasks side of things, we want our tasks to be all those things that you see on the screen right there. So we want it to connect to our learners. We want it to be motivating, realistic. We want it to be realistic now and in the future. We want it to be all of the things that are linguistically appropriate for them, where they're at in their development. We want to create strong links to our curriculum. We also want our tasks to provide many pathways for students to be able to use to achieve their success with this task. We want the tasks to be open-ended so that students can enter into it from a point of view of their interests and their skills, and that they can set their goals as well alongside you as their teacher to push themselves in their development. We want our tasks to be complex because we know language is complex and the way we use language is complex. We want them to consider social and cultural contexts because we know that that connection between language and culture is so important. And most of all, as teachers, what we want to do is provide those scaffolds for students so that the language they're using leads to those purposeful acts in their daily lives. We want diversity, we want to develop those competencies. So really an action-oriented task is meant to do all those things. And Josette and I plan on providing you a very concrete example of how we can do that. So then, just as a starting point, and we're not asking you to answer these questions at the moment. There's going to be other points in our webinar where we will ask for your input. But to set up where we're going with this tonight, we'd invite you to take a moment and consider the following two questions. So how are you structuring learning tasks so that the clear goal is the competency that the student is working with and not so much the content that's in front of them? So in other words, what's the skill? What are they able to do with the language? And then the second question is, how are you setting learning goals that reach beyond what you see in the classroom? And it says there what you will never see. And I don't mean that to sound bleak whatsoever. You will see development in the classroom for sure. We're going to see that and assess it. But what we're thinking of is we're thinking of our students as those social actors of communication that will happen beyond our classrooms when they're in authentic use situations in their future. So that sets up where we're headed.
So if we jump into the task, and I do want to say at this point, some of the questions we'll invite you to reflect on in the chat box or in different ways, and some of them will just invite you to give some reflection on individually. If at any point you have a question or you do have a burning idea that you want to share, please do feel welcome to drop that into the chat, because we're always interested in hearing where your thoughts are as we move through, even if it is to say, you know, I don't agree at all. Throw us out a challenge. We love that. So the task, what we decided to do when we approached this module is we said, we think that it might help to anchor the learning if we present an idea of a framework for a task. And then if we take that task and actually try it in some classrooms with some actual real live students. And so what we did is we came up with a framework that we thought could move a little bit up and down through different grade levels and be modified as well, looking a little bit at program type, but they would have that action-oriented foundation and would have that idea of flexibility in pathways for students, and also to set up, as Adam said so nicely, the skills that we aren't necessarily going to fully see explored in the classroom, but will set students up for later in life. So what we propose to students is we've got a contest and a local community organization. What's the youngest, Gabrielle? So we talked about that a little bit. And so the basic idea is we have a contest. It's released by a community organization to invite young people to go outside of their school and visit somewhere. And so what we said to our sort of intermediate level students, to visit a Francophone country somewhere else in the world or community. So you could think about, even for your grade 1 students, you might say, we're going to go and visit a Francophone neighborhood, or for your kindergarten students, right? And for your grade 12s, you can give them the sky's the limit, find a Francophone region in the world that you'd like to visit. And once they're there, they would spend time with a family. So again, if it's a very young group, They could specifically just be meeting somebody in their own age group that happens to be Francophone. If it's an older sort of upper high school level student, it might be somebody who's going to live for a period of time in a community that they're visiting. And the idea that they would participate in the life of the community and possibly gain a form of work or volunteer experience. So in that as well, we're inviting you to consider how you could think about ideas, certainly of the intercultural awareness component that's woven through our curriculum, but also that idea of giving space for students of all ages, but especially as you move up through the grades. How do we challenge that notion of what is volunteer experience? What are our cultural biases when we travel somewhere to provide volunteer or to work for different agencies? So there really is, we hope that you would agree, a lot of flexibility in this task on how you can move up and down and adapt it to different grade levels and different program areas and levels of competency. So what we'd now like to take a minute and invite you to do is we're going to do what's called a waterfall activity. And if you were here last week, you might have seen that activity. And so what we're asking you to do is to think about what might be the advantages of this style of task. And so we're going to give you sort of a maximum 1 minute countdown where we'd like to invite you to type a thought in the chat box, but not hit enter yet. And when I say go in a minute, I would invite everybody to drop their thoughts on that into the chat box, just so we can see, whether this is resonating with you at all, whether you think this might be something that could work in your context or in a variety of contexts. So again, taking a task that we can go up and down grade level, it's given them something that connects to the community. It gives them a bit of a challenge linguistically and also allows for some cultural exploration and some thoughts around equity and diversity in the classroom. So I'll give about another 30 seconds. Maybe about another 15 seconds. And if you're ready, I'd invite you to go ahead and hit enter, and let's see what some thoughts are on that. Okay, so I see some great thoughts in there. It's open-ended, lots of jumping off points. They can research a topic they find interesting, absolutely, and that's something that's really sort of drawn in some of my students. They can put their own spin. We know, especially as you move up through the grades, students like to feel that they have some agency. You have multiple entry points, and that's really something we're going to speak about tonight, Pamela. Thank you for bringing that one up. It caters to individual interests. Again, it's open-ended. They can apply it going forward. So as we said, we want them to have something that's really getting them to think about, not how am I going to use the skills I'm developing in the classroom while I'm in here for this limited period of time, but how am I building skills that I can see myself using once I move out beyond the classroom. Thank you so much for sharing those ideas.
Thank you. And actually, that gives me a lot of jumping off points to discuss the next point. I want to go back to the question about age groups. And I was sitting here as Josette was explaining that, kind of thinking about what would you do in a kindergarten grade 1 class with this? Well, we may travel to a Francophone community, or we may travel in our neighborhood, but who would we want to meet? So we'd probably narrow this task down to who in our community we would want to meet. So is there a chance that there'd be a Francophone firefighter, paramedic, police officer, something like that in our community and what are the questions we would want to ask, and what are the answers they might say? And we might practice some of those conversations in the classroom, and one person could imagine that they're the firefighter or something like that. And absolutely, Gabrielle, thank you for the idea of like meeting another grade 1 classroom. So, and that's, I think, why Josette and I were excited about presenting this task, is because we've created a very precise task that we've tried with a few classes, but we think that with a little imagination and creativity, this can go in a lot of directions. One of the things that we want to talk about then is the content we bring to our students. And the content refers to those comprehension pieces largely. And it's what are the students working with so that they can learn about, in our case, the community they might go to or the activities they might be involved in as a volunteer. So we want students playing with content. We want students doing some reading, and we want students doing some listening as a part of this. And so, yeah, the rural challenge, but I want to say, hopefully the internet connection, Stephanie, at your school would allow for some virtual connections with community members, perhaps. I'm hopeful anyways that that would be an option to explore or have the students explore, depending on your grade, and they could even set up some meetings like that. So we want students doing some reading. But if we're looking at, and I'll use the example, let's say our students are looking at going to Geneva in Switzerland as a Francophone community. We don't have to give them one precise piece of reading about Geneva. We can help them support finding different sources that are at their level. And I'll be happy to share a couple of examples in a moment. When you think about audio content, we can do everything from ourselves, kind of reading something or narrating it to a student at a very slow pace, if that's what the student needs to hear, or if we're dealing with very beginner A1 level students. Or we can have students find YouTube videos about that community and support them and give them a few links. Like, we can provide them 3 or 4 options at different levels. And one of the things I would be excited to try that we haven't yet tried is if we were doing research about community organization, and if we were able to connect through a virtual meeting with somebody who's involved in that organization. And again, you're probably looking there at more of a B1, B2 level. But I think some of our students that do get to that level would benefit from that very authentic interview conversation with someone at an organization. The other thing we wanted to touch on is that power of mediation, and that is students helping one another to understand, or it is students and teachers talking through the learning and not just reading the text to the student, but rather supporting and helping the students with the reading and the comprehension pieces that go with that. So lots of different ways we can look at content. Thanks, Rosette. The next thing I do want to show you is some examples of reading. So we've talked then about different ways we can have students look at French text. So Josette and I went and found, you can see 3 of these are actual football organizations where they're looking for coaches. And in all 3 of these, you can see a different level of, a different level of language and skill ability that's required to decode them. And then on the top of the page, it's sort of a little blurb about what this soccer club in Marseille, this foot club in Marseille, are all about. And so you might have some students researching at that level where they're reading information about a club and deciding if they want to or not, whereas other students in a very basic way are more looking precisely at what the job qualifications would be, what the background would have to be. So different levels of text, and honestly, it took Josette and I about 5 minutes. Now, we knew what we were looking for, but in about 5 minutes, we came up with these 4 different examples. And it does take time, but if we give students an idea of what we're looking for, they can also help us find texts that are appropriate to their needs, and if they work together. Thanks, Josette. We can go to the map, actually. Another way of looking at text is to create a screenshot of a Google map. So this is the town of Charleroi in Belgium, and my Google Maps setting is in French. So all of the different places come up in French. So there's La Piscine Helios, there's Patinoire de Charleroi. So maybe we have somebody that wants to go and volunteer as a coach of a figure skating club. We have Palais des Beaux-Arts de Charleroi. So maybe it's a drama club they're looking at. So for somebody that isn't quite ready to tackle those big paragraphs, or for our visual learners, we can help the students create very simple sentences, as in, où est-ce que tu veux visiter? Je veux visiter la piscine Helios, or je veux aller au bowling flashball. Very simple sentences to practice using this vocabulary. Another option for text. Thanks, Josette. We'll go to another option, which looks specifically at a tourist location, or centre aquatique in Charleroi, and a little description, and then some information. So I've circled in pink at the top, you can see probably some vocabulary there that we would want to explore with the students to help them enrich their vocabulary. Passionné de la natation, en plein air, un toboggan aquatique, things that are probably new to them. Then in blue, we've circled language that connects with what they know in English, mini golf, cafeteria, and then very simple, like what's the directions, where are they located, what's the phone number, what's the cost, and so forth. So simple ways of students attacking information with this kind of text. So you can see here many different examples of text and how we would help students enter into this information and content.
And just one more was again just that idea of popping very quickly onto a tourist site. And sometimes what we'll find is there's some of the content, and Adam talked about that in the last slide, that might be really pertinent and appropriate and might give a jumping off spot for some instruction. But sometimes there's too much. And if we give students, especially our learners who aren't so far along their proficiency journey, too much text, it can overwhelm them. So another option is just to take a text and maybe just put a little bit of redacting over the text. And then there's lots of activities that you could do even beyond that, where you might say, well, you know, this is a redacted text. What do you imagine might be the information that's underneath? What would you add? So it can become both a reading, but also a writing activity. So this gives you really a lot of flexibility and opportunity to bring your students out into the world to learn those skills of how do I take something that's an authentic text, and even if I can't at my proficiency level understand all of it, can I pull key information, words and phrases out of there? And can I have some confidence built because I'm now able to go out and interact with authentic texts? And so what we'd invite you to do now that we've given you sort of those 3 thoughts on how do we look at the content that we're providing to students, because again, we're going to look at modifications in 3 different areas. The first one being content. Have we sparked for you any thoughts, either recollecting things that you've tried in your classroom that have worked more or less well to adapt content for students, or things that you might consider trying now that you've seen a few of these examples? Or even what you might think are the advantages or challenges of going outside of sort of the more standardized, you know, purchase it all in one piece curriculum document and really moving towards the use of authentic texts in your classroom. So if you have any thoughts on that, we'd certainly invite you to drop that into the chat. And just while people are typing maybe some thoughts and ideas, I'm loving that I'm seeing a little bit of networking in the chat over there in terms of connecting with different areas. So maybe we can have some people paired up with schools to do some little bit of authentic connecting by the end of the session. Yeah, absolutely, Trish. As we move into that de-stream grade 9 model, I think this is going to be something that really we need to consider. How do we provide texts that really respond to learners at an even more diverse range of proficiencies? Yeah, and I like, Andrea, I like that idea as well of bringing the authentic things like something from a restaurant. Where you're giving the students, I think what I appreciate in your comment is you're mentioning that idea of giving the students a specific information to look for. So rather than take a look at this whole big rich document, really can you pinpoint some specific information that if you were in that setting, you might be looking for? Yeah, for sure, Stephanie, I bet in that diverse context, it is a fine line to walk because you want to challenge them and build that confidence as you build their proficiency, but it can be so risky when you give them authentic texts that they just say, oh my goodness, that looks like something for, you know, real Francophone people, and I don't think I can handle it. But I think the other thing is the more that we gently, incorporate little bits of authentic text, and even again, if we redact portions or we give them only a snapshot of it, then they can start to build that confidence. Trish, I was thinking that as well. Sometimes when you're looking at something like a menu, you can give them a specific challenge to say, if you have a food sensitivity, or if you really don't like this type of food, what on the menu could you try? So it gives them, again, that idea of purpose in the task. So it's not, I have to understand and decode the entire document. I have a purpose, and it's almost like a scavenger hunt to find that information. And sometimes that can be really motivating for students.
Thank you, everyone. And we're really very pleased to see the participation and the ideas. And I think honestly, you're giving Josette and I ideas that we would take away and try out as well. So keep it coming. I love it. So we're going to move from adapting content and meeting students' needs through a variety of different avenues into comment. And again, I just want to be clear, Josette and I are presenting you very, specific starting off points tonight, but feel free to take any of these and go in whatever directions your students would have, whatever inspiration, and also feel free to share those ideas in the chat. So when we think about adapting process, then we're thinking about how the students are working with this material in the classroom and moving towards some kind of production or product, or I'm going to say end result, but I almost shouldn't, because it's never an end result with a language. It's that development. So in our classroom, our year is structured such that we want to see our students do something. So it's how do we move from that content through to that do something and beyond. So the questions around that are, how can learners effectively interact with that content? What supports do those students need in the classroom? How can understanding and producing be scaffolded in small steps or in medium steps? What tools and strategies are familiar to learners? And how do we support agency and metacognition and developing transferable skills? So some of the ways Josette and I have looked at and tried include tools like Mote, which is now an add-on to Google Slides and Google products, where you are able to record your voice. Now, in my board, it's only the teachers that have license to use this at this point, but I suspect that it'll move towards student use eventually. And the nice thing about that is you don't have to import the audio file as we did in the past. It embeds directly into the program. So with Mote, as teachers, we can narrate and the students can click on the audio file right in the program. There's the general text to voice software and apps that exist. Read and write in a Google board is probably one of our favorites, because the students both can listen to text, have it read to them, and then they can speak as well and record themselves. Vocaroo is a free recording tool that allows you to download, or allows the students to download their file directly, and is not saved on the internet or in a cloud. So students, Vocaroo is one that students can use to record themselves. You can see there as well some other tools. And we want to again come back to mediation and the idea of that third person, as it were, that can help understanding happening. It doesn't have to be the third person specifically, but it's that other person that's part of a conversation or a process that helps with comprehension. Thank you. So Jufia, we're going to go to a poll question now, and I'm going to put a link into the chat, and we're going to try, and actually Josette beat me to it. Thank you, Josette, for putting that in the chat. We are going to try this activity and see if it comes up. And the question, and if it doesn't come up, I know Josette's just working on that. If it doesn't come up, then we're going to invite you to share in the chat. We're just trying interactive tools that we can model. The question is, what tools and strategies are you currently using to support diverse student needs? And I'm going to give Josette a moment to try and bring that up so we have the link working to display those answers. But if you click on that link, you should be able to go in and you should be able to input a few ideas. So I will pause there and allow you to share some of your favorites. And Josette's going to give me a sign if we're going to shift to the chat.
I think we're going to get it to work.
Okay, awesome. So,
and I'm seeing some answers come in, which is amazing.
Oh, okay, even better. This is good. Thank you. Oh, and thanks for the comments. Mode is user-friendly. I use it a lot with my students. Perfect. Awesome. Okay, so we're starting to see answers come up. Different ways to present: by video, in-person, small group, access to tech, differentiated instruction, opportunities to chat with peers. Love it. That's authentic. That's what they want to be doing, right? Brightspace, Flipgrid, screen recording myself reading a book. Good. Teaching reading skills to help students decipher text. We ask them to highlight words. Yeah. Baseline knowledge, where are they at? We can't take them forward. We can't help them set their authentic goals if we don't know where they're at. Open-ended tasks, sentence frames. Josette's got some examples of that actually coming up as well. Lots of visuals to highlight main ideas. Thank you. That oral communication practice. Awesome. Visual dictionaries. Hey, Josette, we're getting way more than just 10 answers too. This is working well. We were afraid we were only going to get a few answers, limited. Activating background knowledge, repetition in visuals. So we're seeing that a lot. Sentence frames. Beautiful. Thank you. Excellent. So we can see lots of diverse ways of bringing students in. Hands-on activities that engage them. Open-ended, lots of visuals. So we're seeing those visuals come back again and again. Right. And I think there's a fear that our students, our learners often have, that fear of not understanding, even when they might understand, but those visuals kind of give them that level of security, that safety net, that confirms what they know. The games to engage, sound walls and word walls, absolutely. Right. The listening, what students pull from the clips easily. And we hear this all the time from all kinds of, I'm going to say, experts out there who remind us that that students need to be listening, and students need to be told you don't have to understand everything. Start to pick out those key vocabulary words you know. Go back and listen to something 3 and 4 times and try to build meaning. Visual dictionaries, reference cards, recordings, and I did see the question about Flipgrid and Screencastify come in, so I'm glad. Thank you for sharing, Renee. Lots of games, variety of assessments to make sure the success. And Josette and I are firm in the belief that yes, we have a curriculum and yes, we need to assess, but that assessment in language learning needs to be about building confidence and building that sense that you can do it. There's no secret as to why the CEFR is structured as an asset-oriented tool. That is a can-do tool. So we very firmly believe in all of our work and assessment in building student confidence. And it's that feedback, and we're going to get to that as well. Thank you. The explicit teaching and even modeling of strategies, right? Like that modeling we do in a classroom with students to support them to practice. That's awesome. And different boards have different rules around Flipgrid. Just I'm noticing that conversation. And in some boards, it's the anonymous thing where the students don't record themselves. It's just their voice without their name. They may have a nickname, right? Something like that. And you may have that option in your board to explore anyways. Celebrating learning. Love it. That's awesome. Thank you. Yeah, more exposure to listening again. Input, right? We're not going to be able to speak it if we don't know how to hear it and understand it. So we have to hear it first before we speak it. Thanks, Josette. This is awesome. And thanks to everyone for your sharing. I don't want to go away from this while good ideas are
I
coming.
know. Yeah. I'm just going to see if there we go. We got another slide. So, but again, thank you so much, everyone, because this is, I think it makes the experience so much richer when we bring in all those other ideas. And I love the mix of the practice, the making it fun, but also that reminder that there does need to be at different points along the way a little bit of explicit teaching. And I know, Adam, you mentioned Transforming FSL, and one of the resources I like on there is the Grammaire en Action that really calls us to think about how do we give that explicit teaching that sometimes the students really need, but do it in a contextual way that links it to the experience. So I think there's a lot of room for professional reflection on how do you maintain that balance in your classroom. And so we're going to give you a few examples now of some of the things that I did with my students, because I do have 4 grade 8 core French classes. And as many of you who have taught core French know, you have quite a range of abilities. So I have students who have just decided to change pathways and moved out of immersion programs. I have students who are coming in from other educational experiences who have little to no experience with French. I have a diverse range of needs that come in through IEP. As well, my students who are learning French as their 3rd, 4th, or 5th language. And so I really had to sit down and think with this project. If I want students to think about what it would be like to connect with somebody in another community and how they would really present themselves, introduce themselves, and scaffold that, I brought in a number of different tools. And so one of the things that I reflected on is if I have a wide range of levels in terms of reading and writing, I can't sit down with my class and say, write a little introduction. They need some framing for that. And even the ones that are able to write a slightly longer text, maybe the student who needs to interpret that isn't able to. So I provided them with a variety of tools, this being one of them where it's a combination of a lot of visual prompts where I invited them to circle sort of their top activities. And you'll see, as Anna mentioned, we had a little bit of sentence stems. But then what I did as well to go beyond that is I took the information I was looking for in that sentence stems, and I also created a very simple Google form. So they had the sentence stems available, and they had the questions in a Google form. So that also sort of gives them that little taste of a real life authentic experience. When you're signing up for an activity now, we often find that we receive a Google form, and you have to provide some information in that. And then I was able to then take what they had given me in the Google form and have each response come back into a document that looked like that original page, so that at the bottom was their little bio that they had written through the Google form. And then they circled a few things and allowed them to then go and tell me, if I look at all of the people, because I paired my classes 2 and 2, if I look at all of the profiles from the bios that people created of imaginary people that they might be in this experience, who would I like to be paired with? And to talk about why they might want to be paired with that person. The other thing that was really interesting through this whole experience is that it gave me, even though it was a very simple process, so we'd done some background, we talked about different likes and dislikes and how to present all this information, and then I had them fill in the Google form. But when I looked at the data I was getting, it was such rich diagnostic, assessment for learning data, as well as assessment of learning, because it really allowed me to focus in on where are my different learners, right? So they're writing something in the way that they understand it using their sentence stems, but all of a sudden I'm looking, and if you look at that first box in the top left, that said to me, their sentence structure is really very different. I've got some that need to look at basic mechanics, and I've got some that are really understanding how to put together those simple sentence structures. Again, if you look to the right, do we understand accents? Do we know how to use them on our keyboard? Is that what's slowing us down? Do we understand punctuation? Do we understand maybe that we need to use a full sentence, despite the fact that the model was there and provided? When I went to look at where they were saying that they came from, so that's kind of the bottom box to the left, but also the column above it, it said to me some of my groups actually needed, as we mentioned, some explicit teaching. They needed a little explicit teaching on préposition de lieu. How do you tell someone where you're from? And that little box in the middle tells me as well, has everybody understood the task? So it really gave me a lot of valuable data just in looking at, aggregated by class, how the students had moved through that activity. So this question we're going to move through, I think, fairly quickly. If you have any thoughts at this point in the process, but we do want to try and leave a little time for breakouts at the end. So we would invite you to think about, is there anything that's sticking out to you in that idea of providing that specific timely feedback and support? How do you integrate assessment into the learning process, and how can that guide your journey? I think, Adam, I'm going to jump right on to the next slide so we can leave a little time at the end.
I think so, yeah. And if anyone does have thoughts about those questions, feel free to keep putting them in the chat, but we're going to keep going at this point. And again, we've touched on a lot of this. We've touched on the content and process. So just to look at product now, we think of how learner choice might have impact in a final product, remembering, as Josette and I have said, there's never a final product when it comes to language learning. It's always looking toward the future. But in our classroom context, what is that? How can learner choice have an impact? And then what models and examples exist that learners can access and adapt? And I think a lot of that got mentioned earlier in our poll. Thank you. So I am also going to flip ahead, Josette, to the next slide. And the next slide actually goes back to the question we had in the opening, I think from maybe Gabrielle. And that was around the idea of this task being adapted up and down the levels. Because if we look at this, if learners are preparing and completing an interview with a representative of the committee, so imagine all of our students are preparing to go on this exchange. And in order to be successful, they have to complete an interview of some kind. Create a video or record themselves or write a letter of application, again, multiple ways. In A1, our learners might just describe themselves and a familiar activity they like to do. Whereas in A2, our learners are looking a little more deeply at their activities and kind of justifying a few details about their activities and the location they want to go and how they might match their potential community and host family. In B1, it's justifying their wishes and choices and connecting those to their hobbies. And as you see in B2, debating the conditions of the volunteer work or the experience and really pushing for what they would want their experience to look like through a bit of debate, right? And setting that up. So one task moves up and down those levels quite nicely. Thank you. And then I want to share just a couple of examples that we gathered in our board of these topics from students. And here you just see two, and this was grade 10 religion, actually, immersion. So these two examples, one student chose to make the video on the left, and you just see a little bit of a quote from their work through their video. It was an 8-minute video that talked about personality traits, like after school work, educational experience, why they should be chosen to go on this trip. What are some things about them that, like, what are some weaknesses and strengths? So in a religion context, their choice of community activity had to connect with some form of service, Catholic school board. So it connected with some of the teachings and learnings they had done in a Catholic context. Student on the right chose to do it as a website in written form. So again, and I want to highlight in both cases, we're not at that level. You're headed B1, kind of touching on B2. We're not looking for perfection still. We're not looking for every single verb to be completely conjugated correctly. We're looking for good communication skills. And both of these students exceptionally did that and were able to communicate what they wanted to say about who they are and what they wanted to do with their French.
So if we move on to this example, this was really such an insightful stage in this process for the students. I invited them to use Book Creator. And as I mentioned earlier, they were creating not only their own sort of understanding of themselves, but also a fictional profile of someone they might be interested, they might imagine themselves being in a Francophone country, to work on really developing those ideas of intercultural awareness. And so what I asked them to do at the end of term was to create a bit of an all about me scrapbook using the tool Book Creator. And one of the things I like about Book Creator is it allows for a written and an oral production. So especially those students that are hesitant to stand up in front of the class and give a presentation, it does still allow them to do some voice recording. And again, you can see here a really clear example of the diversity of ability and needs that I have in my classroom. So the student on the left, I mean, both cases, we were looking at how to say they liked or they didn't like something. Yeah, Book Creator, yeah. The student on the left, clearly, this is a student who has the sentence structures down. She understands, she's got a strong ability. The student on the right, it's so interesting because even though he's struggling with the written production, I can see if I read this phonetically, he understands the idea of doing that structure for what I like and I don't like. Despite, and again, it's that idea of when I'm doing an evaluation, I look at the purpose of the task. So I can look past a little bit. The spelling, obviously the student on the right is somebody who really struggles with written production, but I can look past that and say, I have explicitly taught structure for saying something that you like and you don't like, and this student has demonstrated that they understand that structure. So it's that idea of when we give them different pathways and use different tools, it gives us rich data, and sometimes we need to look past the surface and really look at what was the purpose of the communicative task, and has that student demonstrated that they're able to accomplish that purpose?
So again, we're still within the framework of this preparing for this trip to a Francophone community to do an activity, both of which students have chosen. So we get to thinking about assessment, and I'm not going to read through each one of these. This is actually also available. It'll be available on the OMLTA module 3, more in depth, that's available on the website. But I do want to focus on the two middle ones that speak about the global task. Did the learner complete that global task successfully? And then the bottom one in the middle is referring to that reciprocal conversation that we need to be having with our language learners, where the educator and the learner, or learners, because it can happen in a group context as well, can be asking questions about, okay, what was successful? What did you do well? What do you feel good at? And what was difficult? And together we offer solutions to take that next step. The other ones are very common ideas as well, but those two I wanted to really put at the forth. And now Josette actually is going to show you a few more examples that she did with her classes for an assessment lens.
So again, looking forward to how can I assess and how can I a little bit separate out strengths and needs in the different areas of the curriculum. So if I'm looking at something like this where I want to see if the student understands directions, what I did was I used something as simple as a Google Slides and the Pear Deck add-on and had students trace the route. So there gives me some very accurate data on comprehension, but it's not asking students to write a lot. And so sometimes I think we have that challenge of, I look at reading comprehension through the lens of written production, which can disadvantage a lot of our students. So one of the things that we'd like to invite you to consider tonight is, are there tools that you can use and strategies that you can use, even if it's drawing on something in the class? But the other thing, Stephanie, right, like I was able to do this through Google Slides, which works great. But if I didn't have Google Slides, then I could do something as simple as print this out. So the top half of the page has the instructions, the bottom half has the map. All I'm asking the student to do is draw it. If I decide that I want to do more of an evaluation of their oral comprehension, then I can read them the instructions and have them draw it out. So there's lots of different ways with the tech or without the tech. And it's really about that idea of, get together just like we're doing tonight. Yeah, explain everything as well. So that idea of just get together like we're doing tonight and think about, if I go outside of the way that I've done things before and start to separate this out, what are some different ways that I can invite students to demonstrate their learning? So again, I asked them to take the structures that we used, and they had access to their tools and anchoring resources that we used through the unit. But draw me, yeah, if you don't have tech, it can be. But again, this is something that, if I said, okay, I want to see if the student is able to accomplish the task, and I have a written production challenge, then maybe I have a page with a series of different options for giving directions. And I have the student use a highlighter to highlight to show me that they can put it together. Okay. And I brought in that idea on this slide as well, is being judicious on when you correct things, but also, again, to come back to that idea of when I look at evaluation and assessment data, it gives me next spots to move forward. So here I see a student that's mixing the tu and vous. So this might be something that I go back to that student, or maybe a small group of students, and have a little lesson on the ones that are ready to look at that. whereas it may not be something that I want to look at from the larger group. Exactly. There's so many different ways that you can do it totally low tech. So again, here's an idea of how can I give them something where I'm looking at comprehension, not requiring a lot of written production, but it's also giving me some rich data on what they understand about how do we do that inversion for question asking, how do we pull out that data, what did they understand. Another example, again, a multiple choice. And again, all of these can be done, right, in a low-tech way. It doesn't have to be through Google Slides, but for your students who benefit from that option, it could be through something like a Google Slides with a Pear Deck.
So as Josette and I began the webinar, we kind of talked about how we can help our students look beyond our classroom, which is what an action-oriented task is all about. Because if all we're doing is helping our learners to speak French in a classroom, we're not benefiting them as individuals or as social actors that are going to go and use their language at some point in the future, we hope. That's why they're in the class. So these are all the long-term competencies that we really want learners to be able to pull into their learning and integrate into our activities. So we want learners to research information. We want them to advocate about what they can do in French and about their personality traits. We want them to justify their wishes. We want them to have confidence to work in a chosen field using the language if they so choose. We want them to dialogue about community, and we want them to practice and apply vocabulary related to travel plans, of course. What a gift that is, and work and interests. So at this point, we're going to put up a question slide, and we are going to attempt, I think we've left ourselves just the right amount of time for this. We are going to attempt to have you have small group conversations around all of the things we've sort of talked about tonight and anything we've inspired you with the frame to get you started with how would you adapt content, process, and product, integrating the choice and flexibility in your classroom, and then building those metacognitive competencies, that is, you're thinking about the learning, to help learners develop their skills for future authentic experiences that you're not necessarily going to ever see. So basically, how would you take all of this? How would you like to take all of this and help your learners develop their confidence for life beyond our classrooms, all within our classrooms? I think if that's clear. So Josette, I think if we did maybe even like a 6-minute breakout room to allow people to.
I'm going to set up some breakouts that are fairly small, so it should give some opportunity to have a quick 6-minute breakout, and then we'll bring you back in. And the other thing I will do as we send you out into the breakouts is I'll send that question out into the chat for anybody who might need it again in their breakout room. So here we go. Thank you for joining us.
If you want me to just send them a message about 1 more minute or something, just let me know.
Perfect. I just shuffled a couple of people who were in breakouts by themselves.
Perfect, thank you.
That was kind of you. thing I haven't used a lot is the breakout rooms in Zoom. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. Uh-oh. I feel like I should have done that because it's giving me a funny message.
No, it should be okay.
Okay. Because it said something about somebody else is recording it now.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. So can I pause it and restart?
Go for it.
Thank you.
Recorded.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much. I'll just invite you to make sure that you're still on mute for a minute. Before we do sort of hit the end of our time, I did want to acknowledge that the Ontario Modern Language Teachers Association has received some funding from the Ministry of Education in order to support the development of this module. And so we are appreciative of that, and also wanted to send out one last special thanks to the educators listed on your screen who contributed their expertise and experience to developing the modules, with a special mention to Jordan Sloan from Renfrew County, who oversaw the project. And I do understand that it is 8:01, so if you're running out of your time and heading off to other duties and responsibilities around your house, I understand that, but if you are able to stay around for a minute or two, I would love to see either in the chat or now I would invite you to unmute and share anything that came up in those breakout sessions, or any questions that you might still have, or any lingering thoughts that you'd like to share with us before you head off for the rest of your night. And also just send out a really big thank you to everyone who joined us and participated tonight. This was a wonderful, wonderful sharing opportunity. We really, Adam and I both appreciate all of the engagement tonight.
Absolutely. And I also want to express my thanks to Angeline Humber from the OMLTA executive, who's been in the background helping us with the tech all night. So Angeline, merci beaucoup.
Merci, c'était un plaisir.
I see a lot of thank yous and goodbyes. Is there anybody that had something from their breakout or a thought to end the evening that they'd like to pop on and share with us?
Hi, it's Natasha. I'm from Guelph. I just want to say, sometimes you know things and it's just common sense. And of course, these things, but every once in a while you hear it said in such a way and you're like, oh, it's just kind of hitting you. And Adam said this tonight about how we are teaching them to speak for the future that we will never see, and that we're not teaching them just to speak in the classroom. Well, of course we know that, but something in the way that it was communicated tonight just kind of hit me, and it makes me think about the lens that I will look at things through. I'm not actually teaching French in a classroom, but I am doing lots of supply plans right now. And thinking, what is the purpose of this? Is it just for, is this just for the classroom? Is this going to be something that they can take with them? So I don't know, just something in the way that it was communicated tonight is just hitting me just the right way. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. That's really nice of you to say that.
And I think as well, Natasha, even if, you're saying you're just doing supply plans right now, but even in that, as you're supply teaching and as you're coming into a classroom, it's still that idea of how do we take whatever we're doing as a supply teacher or as somebody on a longer contract or a permanent position, how are we setting up our students for what they'll go and do farther beyond the four walls of our classroom? Because isn't that really why we're doing what we're doing?
It is, and to add to that, Josette and Natasha, thank you again. It's that I think we can easily get stuck in that idea of the curriculum and those expectations that we put on ourselves, that we have to have that proof of what the students can do, and okay, that's kind of what we get paid to do in a way, because that's the product we have to produce. Funny how it comes full circle to our product, right, when it comes to assessment. But the truth is that everything we do, and especially with languages, doesn't just stop at that product, right? And I think even conversations with parents can reflect this. Andrea, thank you for that comment as well. That's
we were saying in our group just how with core French, it's nice for the flexibility, like the fact, like in core, especially being a core French teacher, is that like, you know, I jotted down tons of ideas and was like, everything you guys were saying, I was writing down. And then I'm like, okay, now I can like, and then I have like branch off ideas from that. But it's great because I'm not like, oh, I have to get this done. I can be like, okay, now I can like do this. Like, I just love the flexibility of core French for that. But like, we're still meeting all their needs, but we can, you know, branch off and do what we need to do, or just branch off like, oh, this is a great idea, let's run with it. Like, I find that's the nice thing about it, is we can kind of go with the kids' ideas too a lot of the times. So yeah, and you know, they're the ones who are going to know what they're going to use in the future. So, or not, they might not know, but what their interests are, and so we can kind of help with that way when you're talking about future stuff. So yeah, so thank you again.
Thank you so much, Faith. And I would definitely say I agree with that. I do love the flexibility of core French, that it's, even though we have our curriculum that we're following, it's not as tied to now you do this, now you do this, now you work through your checklist of learning goals. It really does allow you to go where they're interested in going and build that idea for as well. I think linking back to what Andrea said, even yes, we look at for our students that are stronger, what they might go and do outside the classroom with that French, but also even the idea for our students of saying, I'm giving you skills to figure out how to use a language you're less familiar with in an authentic situation. And maybe you might find yourself in a situation in the future where it's not French, but if you break it down to what are my communicative goals, what are my vocabulary basic requirements, it gives you also that scaffolding to go even further into other languages as well. And so we really are building a toolkit for our students, right, to allow them to go out and interact in the world.
Yeah, no, exactly. I've actually said to my students before, I said, you know, like we're giving, like I talk about that because I'll say like a doctor, for example, I was like, I can listen to a doctor, I have no idea what they're saying, but then I can kind of start deciphering based on, okay, I learned how to decipher something I didn't understand before. Or like a mechanic, like I said, there's so many jobs out there that if you were to tell me all the different terms, I'd say, I have no idea what you're talking about, but then I can use some of like what I've used in the past to kind of try to figure that out. So I do try to do that as well. Like just point out to them, it's like, this is also maybe to help you with this. Like you never know when you're going to use that toolkit of skills. So yeah, it's just really great.
Yeah, I think it's that pride, and we know that we're very fortunate to have this opportunity to do that core French, because it is such a unique opportunity to change up what you're doing and try different things and go where the students are interested in going.
and I just want to, sorry, Faith, go ahead, Faith.
No, I was just saying, yeah, for sure. That's all. I just wanted to let her know I acknowledged. Yeah, that was all.
And I wanted to highlight a comment in the chat. Just I think it's Julie made a comment about opening kids up to the idea that things exist outside of their own community, right? And if you're in a small community where maybe French is never heard, which we know, we think about rural, right? You talked about that earlier. Stephanie, I think, talked about that earlier. So helping students open up to the fact that there's more outside of your community that are opportunities. We have that gift as core French educators that's presented to us through our work that we do to help kids see that there's a whole world out there that is really worth exploring.
Hi, I'm just wondering, is there a resource that you recommend for figuring out how to go about planning these large, I action-oriented approach. I look at it and I think, oh, that's such a fantastic idea. That's such a great idea. And then just putting it all together is a challenge. I also find I teach extended French 7-8, but we start our extended program in grade 7. So they've had 3 years of core French, and then, oh, now 50% of your classes are in French, the same as the immersion students. Deal with it. So I find it challenging to figure out how to put it all together in French class, as well as somehow teach history and science and geography en français, or whatever other subjects they decide are in French this particular year, because my board likes to switch it around just for fun.
At the risk of teachers getting bored, I love that. So Rebecca, I'm just, so there's a resource that I think about right away is, I know that I believe it's Angelina or Adam, you can correct me, I think it's Casalt that put out the action-oriented handbook that has some ideas. But I'm wondering, in your specific context, are you seeing the same group of students for the multiple subjects, or is it a rotary?
Yes. So I have the way we tend to do it in our school. It's a bit weird right now because of COVID protocols and whatever, but we are still doing, usually we have 2 classes of extended for each grade level for grade 7 and 8. This year we have an odd number. So I have a homeroom of grade 8, and then I have another class of grade 7 and 8, but only 8 grade 7s in it. The rest are grade 8. And then there's another separate grade 7 extended French class that I don't teach. So I see both classes. And then my teaching partner teaches them their English subjects. And then we have a music teacher, and then we have an art and gym teacher. Same guy teaches both. So yeah, it is the same group of students, and I really lucked out that it's actually all the same students basically that I had last year, other than the new grade 7s. So I do get to know them really well.